right, welcome everyone. I am going to attempt this first online Bible study here at the Cleveland Airport. So we'll see how this works. I'm sure it's going to be a little loud, but hopefully this works okay for us for in future times where I'm not as busy of a place. But we have been going through the book of Galatians, and the title I put on Galatians is Jesus plus nothing equals everything. And the point of that is that when you start adding anything to the gospel, it messes it up. It breaks it. And so one of the issues that the Galatians were having is they were adding in aspects of the law to salvation, that you need to do this aspect of the law. And Paul comes out really harsh against it. And he's going through all these different arguments for why you can't just mix the law with this new promise in the new covenant. All right, and so we're going to look through Galatians chapter 3, verses 15 to 18 today. And we were going to look at this particular argument that Paul is making here. All right, so Galatians chapter 3 and verse 15. He says, "To give a human example, brothers, even with a man-made covenant, no one annuls it or adds to it once it has been ratified." All right, and so he's building the argument here, and he's going to be talking about the Abrahamic covenant that he's been talking about, and saying, like, yeah, you can't change this. You can't alter this in any way. And if you alter the promise that is made, then it breaks, that covenant's been broken. That's like an underhanded thing to do. And so God made a promise here to Abraham, all right? And in that promise, you can't then say, well, now I'm adding some aspects of the Old Testament law to this. That would be amending the covenant. Not even humans do that. God certainly wouldn't do that. All right, as we continue on verse 16, he says, "Now promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring." It doesn't say to offsprings, referring to many, but referring to one, and to your offspring, who is Christ. All right, and so this statement here is coming from the promise that comes through the Abrahamic covenant, saying that from your offspring will one come that's going to bless the whole earth. So this isn't a promise that is through all the Jewish people are coming to bless the earth. It's through one particular Jewish person is going to bless the whole earth, i.e. Christ. And he says, this is what I mean. The law, which came 430 years afterward, does not annul a covenant previously ratified by God so as to make the promise void. So in that 430 years, basically, Abraham was given this prophecy in about 2000 BC. All right, you fast forward to when the law is given to Abraham. All right, and it's in fact that this kind of mention here, this 430 years, is really where we date the time of the Exodus. There are different people that have different dates for the date of the Exodus. A lot of it is coming around Ramesses. We see a specific mention of Ramesses, the second there in the book of Exodus. But Ramesses, the time frame of that doesn't work out real well. And in fact, I don't think it is actually referring to Ramesses the king, but the city. And I think the city wasn't what it was actually called in the Exodus day, but what it's eventually called. And so this is where Moses ended up writing that name down because it was a more understood name. All right, but there's a lot of kind of little ins and outs of what that is. But from that 430 years is where this is usually where we take the idea of where the Exodus actually took place. All right, and it tells us that when the law comes into Moses 430 years later, all right, it doesn't annul a covenant previously ratified by God. All right, and so if you are all of a sudden saying, well, salvation, that we didn't really understand salvation in Abraham's day, you could only understand salvation once Moses came along. He's saying, no. The law wasn't around in Abraham's day when he promised that from his offspring someone would come to bless the whole earth. Again, kind of a foreshadow of salvation. And so he's saying that is still in effect. No law necessary to fulfill that promise. All right, for if the inheritance comes by the law, it does no longer comes by a promise, but God gave it to Abraham by a promise. I think the way we would phrase this today in modern day context context would be to say, like, if you say something is by works, if you say something is by, something you have to do, then it would be the opposite of faith. And so he's saying if something comes by a law, like you can't do something, and if you don't do this thing, then you're going to be saved. Well, then you can't say it's by some kind of promise. You can't say it's by some kind of blessing from God. And so he's kind of contrasting those two things. It's either by a promise or by law. It can't be by both. All right, then what? I'm going to pause there. All right, so this is kind of where we are stopping here for today. And I think there's a couple really interesting things that we need to fully draw out of this. Number one, where some of the confusion that was happening in that day, and it does still happen today, some of the confusion is coming into place of, well, then what role does the Mosaic law play? And what we've kind of drawn out of this so far, and we're going to hit on more later, is, it doesn't have anything to do with salvation. It points to the need of a Savior. The law is great in showing our weakness as people, our need to have a Savior in our life. But now that Savior has come, and if you have believed the Savior, we're going to deal with that more later, but if you believe in the Savior, then the purpose of the law has already been fulfilled. All right, but the idea, and I think it's a very important piece to understand, is that when we're building these covenants on top of each other, what was the new covenant built off of? And the answer is the new covenant wasn't built off, when I say new covenant, I mean Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection on the cross, wasn't built on top of kind of the Mosaic law. It was built on top of the Abrahamic covenant. It was built on top of that promise. And so when we think about these steps that are being taken, that there's this step that goes right from the Abrahamic covenant to this new covenant that we have now. All right, and it's important for us to see that God doesn't change, amend, annul, or alter these covenant promises in any way, because if we were to see that he did that, we would suddenly look at, the promise that we have in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, and we start freaking out. That's like, what about if he changes his mind on that? What about if he changes and adds something to it? The comfort that we have of seeing the Abrahamic covenant still, that promise is holding true, is it lets us know that the promises that he's made to us are going to be held true. And I do think one of the kind of anecdotal things I look at in the world today, seeing that Israel is still around, there's still Jewish people around, that these promises of, I promise to bless those that bless you, curse those that curse you, seem to, our eyes are telling us we're still seeing that play out. And so because we're still seeing that play out, it's this reminder that God always keeps his promises. All right, I'm going to film in an airport next week as well, and then hopefully I will stop doing airports for a little bit. I will post this online and see how this goes. Hope you interact, ask any questions you'd like, really in anything in Galatians that we've already done, but certainly on anything in the passage, and I will hope to respond quickly. Have a great day, everyone. God bless. Be praying for me. I'll see y'all soon.